We went to Atlanta in 1962. We'd been in Richmond since 1954, and that was the time of the Supreme Court decision to desegregate the public schools. The state of Virginia was very anxious to avoid this, and they were doing so by closing the public schools. And so we spent a great deal of time trying to save the public schools. And I can remember going to NAACP meetings, protest walks, marches, and I'd be the only white person there. When we got to Atlanta, there were many more resources, and it was the groups were much better organized. Already the Christian Leadership Conference was very active, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and the Unitarian Service Committee had an office there in human relations with a paid staff. The church members in the Atlanta church were very much involved in civil rights, and one of the members, who was a very active member in the community as well as in the church, was the dentist to the King family. And so very shortly after we arrived, he took Martin Luther King and me to lunch. And that was my first meeting with Dr. King. He was a very gracious man, soft-spoken, showing interest in where I'd gone to school and my ministry in Richmond and what I could expect in Atlanta. He had spoken at the church a number of times before I got there. After I was there, he only spoke once. But the person who spoke more frequently and was really loved by the congregation was his father, Daddy King. And Daddy King would come to the congregation and bring either his soloists or his choir in order to teach the Unitarian Universalists how to sing. But the Kings were always very complimentary about the church in Atlanta and very appreciative of the support that the church had given to him and his family and the movement. But I had a closer relationship with Mrs. King, Coretta King. The first school to be integrated in Atlanta was the elementary school where our girls attended. And it was integrated with the King children. So she and I would consult on problems dealing with integrating a white school. The one thing that I remember from that time was that the principal of the school was a very, very Southern lady. And one of the customs had been for the boys in the school to go to a nearby Presbyterian church for Boy Scout meetings. And so after the King children came to the school, the church had requested that the Negro children not come. And so she responded by saying that if all of my boys can't come, then none of them can come. And so none went to Scouts. The church and our house became the staging area for Unitarian Universalist ministers from across the country coming to Atlanta. And we marched in Selma, in Montgomery, and Birmingham. And there were many additional protest marches in Atlanta. And then most of us went on to Washington and were inspired by Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. I was always uneasy in confrontational situations, a queasy stomach sort of thing, and it is a wonder that I didn't end up with stomach ulcers before we left the South. But I had a strong sense of oughtness and a strong sense for the cause of racial justice. It had always been lonely for religious liberals in the South, but in those days it could also be dangerous. But it was an exciting time, a time of transformational social change. And I came away from the South knowing that our Unitarian Universalist fellowships and churches in the South made a difference. They helped keep alive the values of justice and equality in those conservative communities. And frequently, they provided important leadership for liberal religious groups working in the South. And I'm convinced that we made a difference for the better. Dr. King said, we must accept finite disappointments, but we must never lose infinite hope. And I don't think we did.